Hello, dear friends. Today we will look at the memoirs of Otto Carius, a German tank ace from World War II. He destroyed more than 150 enemy tanks and self-propelled guns, one of the highest scores of World War II. Don't forget to leave your opinion about this material and support this video with a like. Well, let's begin. The first T-34. Another event hit us like a ton of bricks. The first Russian T-34 tanks appeared. The amazement was complete. How could it be that those at the top didn't know about the existence of this superb tank? The T-34, with its good armor, ideal shape, and magnificent 76.2 millimeter long-barreled gun, struck fear into everyone, and all German tanks feared it until the end of the war. What were we to do with these monsters thrown at us in such numbers? At that time, the 37 millimeter cannon was still our most powerful anti-tank weapon. With luck, we could hit the T-34's turret and jam it. With even more luck, the tank would then be unable to fight effectively. Of course, it wasn't a very promising situation. The only way out was the 88 millimeter anti-aircraft gun. With its help, it was possible to act effectively even against this new Russian tank. Therefore, we began to treat the anti-aircraft gunners with the utmost respect, whereas before we had only given them condescending smiles. The Ivans, as if sensing our predicament, launched their first attack in our sector with their "Hurrah! Hurrah!" At first, we thought that our infantry was attacking with cries of "Hurrah!" However, we soon learned that the opposite was true. Since Moscow was considered to be almost in our hands, we began to suspect that we could no longer count on a quick end to this campaign. Therefore, I had mixed feelings when, on August 4, 1941, I received an order to depart for Erlangen to the 25th Tank Reserve Battalion. 3 days earlier, the insignia of a non-commissioned officer had appeared on my uniform. In Erlangen, we took a test to obtain a license to drive a truck and a tank. Immediately after that, we arrived in Wunsdorf, near Berlin, to undergo officer candidate training. On February 2, 1942, I was informed that I did not meet the requirements for this training course. Like Gert Meyer and Klaus Waldenmeyer from our platoon, I did not take this seriously. Besides, there was one question I could not ask. I thought I had an opportunity to confide my doubts to the blackboard, but my superiors did not find the question, "Are reserve officers human?" amusing at all. So, we were still non-commissioned officers and officer candidates when we left the training course. Strictly speaking, we weren't too upset about it. After all, the newly minted lieutenants had to serve in reserve units, while we were immediately sent back to our former regiment. We were dismissed with words of encouragement. Our supervising officer, whom we all adored because he was a real personality and took his duties to heart, said in parting that he was confident we would soon achieve our goal at the front. There, he said, it would be much easier for us to prove that we were worthy of becoming officers. I still remember him today. I congratulated the Bundeswehr on its good fortune when I learned that Oberst Philipp had become commander of the training regiment in Andernach, back in the old company. We found the 21st Regiment in its winter positions in Gzhatsk. It had been terribly depleted. Only one company was still equipped with tanks. All the other vehicles had been destroyed in battle during the shameful retreat in the winter of 1941/42. "We've been waiting for you," our comrades greeted me. "Well, show us what they taught you." They smiled conspiratorially, and we sensed that something was afoot. We were given the task of changing the snow removal team. It consisted of clearing the road in front of the tanks during combat operations so that they would not get stuck. In the snow, in our black uniforms, in front of the tanks themselves. What a job! Contrary to expectations, everything went smoothly. Besides, we were, of course, in a better position than our comrades, who, in their tank uniforms, had to act as infantrymen. We looked with envy at how well equipped the Ivans were compared to us. We experienced real happiness when several replacement tanks finally arrived from deep behind the lines. The 10th Company was completely re-equipped, and I was able to take command of my platoon. From March to the end of June 1942, we were bogged down in defensive battles with the Russians around the positions we had occupied since winter near Gzhatsk and east of Vyazma. Then we were transferred to the Sychevka area, where we took part in defensive battles east of Belarus. During this battle, I was recommended for a promotion, but a few days later, something happened that almost cost me my new epaulettes. My platoon was positioned along a forest path. "What a great spot," my driver rightly remarked. We couldn't be seen from the front or the rear. There were trees and bushes everywhere. No man's land began on the other side of the path. An anti-tank gun was positioned nearby, slightly to the side. We were accompanied by infantrymen. The drivers and loaders of my 4 tanks had just left to get some meat. My thoughts were already on food when the shooting started and the Russians attacked. Half of the crews were absent. None of the tanks were ready for battle. I panicked, slid into the driver's seat, and backed out of the thicket. The other tanks in my platoon followed me, thinking that radio communication had failed. They were following the rules, which said that in cases like this, they should do what the platoon commander did. After driving a few hundred meters, I realized what I had done. The anti-tank gun crew and a bunch of infantrymen apparently lost their composure when they saw me take off. I quickly turned around and returned to my previous position. The magnificent guys in the rifle cells kept their nerves in check and had already repelled the attack. "Buddy, what kind of heroes are you?" asked the gun commander. "If that's all you can do, you'd better not go to the front at all." I stood there dumbfounded, and all I could do was assure him that it would never happen again. After that incident, I felt uncomfortable for a long time. How easy it was to make a hasty decision, and how serious the consequences could be. Of course, I should have stayed where I was. That became clear after a few minutes. But the mistake was made the moment we started the engines. This episode taught me a valuable lesson, and I always reminded myself of it, especially when I had to make decisions concerning my subordinates. I was happy that I had the opportunity to make amends before our unit was transferred to the area north of Orel. Taking advantage of this opportunity, I could at least wait for a promotion with a clear conscience. However, before I received my promotion, I was destined to become acquainted with a special area of combat operations. For a short time, I became the commander of an engineering platoon at company headquarters. Disaster. We were in our shelters far behind the front line. One morning, the excited commander called out to me, "Hey, Karius, take a look. It's just like in the movies. Just imagine, a newly equipped Luftwaffe field division had just passed our location on its way to the front." I gasped. It was like a fairy tale. From the duffel bags to the guns, everything was brand new. We saw weapons we had only heard about: MG-42 machine guns, 75mm long-barreled anti-tank guns, and other amazing things. We wanted to believe that we would finally be able to completely re-equip our units. Everything that was going to the front guaranteed a peaceful winter in this sector. Our company commander, of course, was eager to take a closer look at all this splendor, and we moved to the front line to reconnoiter the situation. An atmosphere of confident calm prevailed. It seemed as if we were in a training area. The non-commissioned officers wore elegant peaked caps. The soldiers moved slowly and looked bored in their positions. There were absolutely no signs of combat. For this reason, they covered their MG-42 machine guns to keep them from getting dirty. It was simply impossible to persuade our comrades in arms to demonstrate this hitherto unknown marvel to us even once. What would happen if the Russians decided to attack here? Before the weapons were ready for battle, the Russians would take control of the positions. Our fears were soon confirmed. A dull rumble approaching from the northeast woke us up one morning. We strained our ears for a few minutes, after which nothing could keep us in the underground shelters. Outside, a blizzard with stinging snow took our breath away and knocked us off our feet. For the Russians, it was ideal weather for an attack. Without waiting for the alarm, we woke up the company. Our suspicions were confirmed. Soon, a report came in that the Russians had broken through. We found the commander of the Luftwaffe field division at the command post in a state of complete despair. He did not know where his units were. Russian tanks had crushed everything around them before the anti-tank guns had a chance to fire a single shot. The Russians had captured the latest equipment, and the division had scattered in all directions. Fortunately, after a quick initial victory, the enemy immediately stopped. They were afraid of being ambushed. With some effort, our regiment was able to eliminate the breakthrough. It was a real madhouse. When one infantry unit approached the village, people in Luftwaffe uniforms waved to them in greeting. And suddenly, they opened devastating fire. They were Russians and captured winter clothing. After that, we were ordered to shoot at any soldier in Luftwaffe uniform, as it could only be Russians in disguise. Unfortunately, several of our scattered assault groups fell victim to this order. Whenever we heard an MG-42 machine gun rattling in the distance over the next few days and weeks, we could swear on our lives that it was the Russians firing. We never got to try any of them out, and our infantrymen usually had to make do with captured Russian weapons. We were all furious at the thought of the failure of those who entrusted the best weapons to completely inexperienced, poorly trained troops and immediately threw them into the front line. How carefully we treated people and equipment in the following weeks in offensive and defensive battles south of the Belev-Kozelsk-Sukhanichi line. I experienced a particularly unpleasant moment in one of the operations, already as a newly minted lieutenant and commander of a sapper platoon. We were tasked with clearing the area of mines before the tanks could advance. I was incredibly surprised that I only suffered a superficial wound to my arm. After that, I began to appreciate the work of our sappers. I was happy when I was transferred back to my former 1st Company. I saw August Deller, my old tank commander, again. By that time, he had become a sergeant, and, naturally, we rode together in the same platoon. In the operation in which we took part, our battalion suffered the heaviest losses since the beginning of the campaign. The Russians made extensive use of anti-tank rifles, which easily penetrated the armor of our tanks. Our losses were very heavy. Many of our comrades were fatally wounded in their tanks, and the seriously wounded had to be evacuated. We were completely helpless in the night battle. The Russians let us get too close. By the time we noticed them, it was too late to defend ourselves, as it was impossible to use tank sights at night. A feeling of helplessness overwhelmed us. Fortunately, the first T4 tanks with 75mm long-barreled guns and T3 tanks with thicker armor and 50mm long-barreled guns began to arrive in small numbers from the deep rear. It was a glimmer of hope for the possibility of regaining strength, which so often appeared during the war in Russia. After having virtually lost all hope and faith in our own vehicles, we were encouraged again, and this enthusiasm was enough for the last unsuccessful attack on Plovsk and Belev. Meanwhile, January 1943 arrived. I was supposed to take leave to the rear before the upcoming cancellation of leave. On the evening before my departure, August Deller took his tank out of its shelter. It had been dug into the ground to protect it from the bitter cold. Deller walked across the smooth surface in his fur boots and slipped to the front of the vehicle's left track. It caught him, and the driver didn't notice. The rest of the crew shouted, and the tank was stopped immediately. But the track had already run over the upper part of Deller's thigh. He died on the spot without making a sound. I lost one of my best friends. Then I was really ready for leave, and eagerly awaiting my arrival home to my parents' house. But it looked like I wouldn't be able to enjoy my stay there. Soon, a telegram arrived, announcing my transfer to the 500th Training Battalion. Disappointed, I wondered why I couldn't return to my old company. I arrived in Putlos, expecting to have to undergo another course of artillery training. I would have been very happy to return to my old frontline company. That's what I thought until I arrived at headquarters and learned that officers with frontline experience and several companies from the Eastern Front were to undergo training here on a new type of tank, the Tiger. The news spread like wildfire, but no one knew anything specific about it yet. We had the opportunity to see several prototypes of this tank in the final stages of development, but we did not like them very much. Hauptmann Lutikow was to lead the training. I knew him from Russia and did not consider it very kind of him to assign me the responsibility of leading the officers' meeting. Probably there were no other junior officers available. Nevertheless, there was nothing I could do about it. At that time, there was no indication that this job would bring me luck. We went to Paderborn, the location of the 500th Training Battalion, which was later given responsibility for all units with Tigers. I met Captain Schober, the head of the officers' assembly. He had arrived from Russia with his company for retraining. Von Lutikow strictly ordered me to fulfill all of Schober's requests regarding the provision of alcoholic beverages. They were close friends. Schober liked to have a drink or two from time to time. He showed up at my establishment almost every day, as I had to control the scarce supplies. There we got to know each other better and began to respect each other. I had the feeling that he liked me not only because of his particular fondness for French vermouth. We also often spent time in the company of the guys from his company. I was especially happy when he asked me one day, "Karius, would you like to transfer to my company?" "Yes, sir. I'm ready right now, Herr Hauptmann." I couldn't believe my luck. Initially, only 2 companies were being formed. At most, 6 people were needed from the entire group of officers, and I was among them. On my recommendation, Schober took Oberleutnant von Schiller as his deputy. I knew him from the 21st Regiment. I was relieved of my duties at the officers' meeting shortly after being transferred to the new company. Schober was quite fond of alcohol. It should also be noted that he supplied the entire company with alcohol all this time. When several bottles were requested for a reception in honor of some big shot, I had to respectfully report that there was not a drop left. Well, my successor did not have to take over any supplies. The handover was not burdensome. I was able to devote myself entirely to the affairs of the company. When Schober introduced me to the company, I couldn't help but remember the comments of my fellow travelers when I was called up. I will never forget how Company Sergeant Rieger and Senior Sergeant Delzeit stared at me. They later admitted their first impression of me. It could be summed up with the following statement: "What a shorty! Where did our old man dig up this little fart?" Naturally, It was difficult for an outsider to gain trust in a combat company. But everything went smoothly. Even before our departure for France, where we were to receive our Tigers, I became very close with these guys. It felt like I had always been with them. Unfortunately, Hauptmann Schober was called away to take command of a battalion. His farewell speech lingered in my ears and inspired me. He asked the soldiers to show me the same trust they showed him. I put my heart and soul into my duties. After several months of training, we made great progress, overtaking the other companies in the battalion. During training, we had fewer technical problems than the others. I didn't dare to hope for this when Schober handed the company over to Hauptmann Radke. Hauptmann Ume commanded the 3rd Company. The 1st Company had been gaining experience as an experimental unit in the northern sector of the Eastern Front since the fall of 1942. After formation and staffing, we were to follow it to the Leningrad area. That's all for today. If you liked the video, please support it with a like and subscribe to the channel. See you all soon.